Welcome to the Malta Chamber podcast. This is the 5th episode out of a 6-part series covering scams, fraud, internal fraud, and cyber attack. These are major risks that the business community are facing, not just on international level, but also on a local level. And this is what we are trying to educate our business community, that this doesn't happen only abroad, but it is happening on a daily basis in our country. The Malta Chamber and BOV together have revealed methods how scammers and fraudsters use to target companies of all sizes. Whether you run an established business, whether you're a startup, the risks are there, and we are trying through these podcasts to help you establish the red flags and how to mitigate these measures. Previously, we covered scams affecting businesses, affecting individuals in Malta. We also discussed internal company fraud, as I said earlier, cyber attack, the last episode as well. But today, we're going to speak about the silent perpetrators and the risk-based approach. And to do this, I have two guests with me, Alfred Zammit, a FIAU director, and Ryan Caruana, who you have seen also in previous podcasts, BOV Group Chief Anti-Financial Crime Officer. Ryan, Alfred, thank you very much for joining us today. Alfred, I'll start with you. How do silent perpetrators hide their role when it comes to fraud?
Well, when it comes to fraud, first of all, there are many different types of frauds. So sometimes they're quite simple, but sometimes they're also very complex. And sometimes behind them, you have a few perpetrators, and sometimes behind them you have a more complex setup of people involved in the carrying out of a fraud. So when it comes to this, first of all, yes, as you are rightly saying, many people and companies and businesses are being targeted by fraudsters. And when it comes to the fraud that we see that is being carried out, we see it also getting more complex, more elaborate, and very well carried out to target individuals or companies who are vulnerable to fraud. Now, behind them, you can have a very complex setup. You have fraudsters who are possibly in Malta, but also very often we are being victims to fraudsters who are outside Malta. And obviously, you have therefore a number of people who are involved in the carrying out of a fraud scheme. You can have the actual people who are reaching out to their victims. You can have actually other people also involved in setting up a complex mechanism to receive those funds and to then transfer funds coming from a fraud across different channels, across different transactions involving different companies and involving different jurisdictions. So there are several ways how behind the fraud scheme, you might not even be aware that there is quite a complex setup, and there are lots of different entities involved in carrying out that fraud, and then in obviously being able to use that money that they recover from, that is obtained from a fraud scheme.
As an FIAU, and also this question I would like also Ryan to answer it. Maybe you identify what are the loopholes, the financial loopholes, or the legal loopholes, or the digital loopholes that allow them to infiltrate your system, infiltrate your tech devices.
Yes, but when it comes to loopholes, I would say that it's not so much a matter of loopholes. I would say that with products, with services, with technology, everything can be used very legitimately, but also everything can be used for in the wrong ways.
Okay, give an example.
So, for example, if we look at AI. So we see an increase in use of AI that is being used to lure victims into giving up their hard-earned savings. So AI can be used by criminals to perpetrate fraud. It can be used to generate fake images, to generate fake videos, for example. But at the same time, it can also be used in good ways. It is being used by banks. It is being used by authorities around the world in detecting, for example, fraud, in detecting suspicions of money laundering, and in acting on these cases in a more efficient manner. Similar to the internet. The internet obviously has changed things very significantly when it comes to fraud. So it is a tool that can be used in very right ways. I mean, in many ways, it is a tool that is even used by investigators, by authorities, by financial intelligence units. But likewise, it is a tool that is also used by criminals. So I think one of the greatest problems with fraud is that very often it happens at great speed. So once a fraud is actually consumed, actually takes place, from then on, the biggest challenge for the system to work is keeping up with speed. So transactions happen quickly, money flows instantly across borders, across jurisdictions. It can flow through the traditional financial system. It can flow through the crypto industry, for example. So, which are, once again, these are industries that have very legitimate uses, but every industry can be, and every operator can be misused. So criminals know no borders. They don't have rules, whereas everyone else has to respect rules, including authorities. So it's more than a loophole, it's just the way it is. We're often chasing money, and very often, obviously, when money has left someone's, for example, bank account, to follow that money, you need time, you need international cooperation mechanisms to kick in. Usually they take days, possibly even more. Whereas obviously the criminals, they have no borders, they have no rules, and it can take just a few seconds to send money all over the world, break it down into smaller amounts, and have it sent across to many different jurisdictions.
Okay, on that point we'll come later, because this is a very interesting point. Ryan, from your experience, even in a bank, what are the loopholes that you see?
I echo Alfred's comments on this, and I don't consider these as loopholes, right? Because if we have to consider what is the legal basis on fraud, perhaps fraud is part of the period offences. It's listed in the number of period offences that is highlighted by law. So fraud, it's a crime, and even in previous episodes, there was the police. They mentioned how they're taking people to court, how the challenge is how difficult it is. So rather than loopholes, I think they are challenges on how the opportunities nowadays are much more easier for fraudsters, even considering that we are living in a digital age. And we mentioned this also last time on a number of episodes, that there is an increased opportunity for fraudsters to work even freely. Last time, Rachel, we mentioned that in previous years, if I need to take something from you, if you need to steal, you need to go into your house, right, or into your assets. Nowadays, I can say in under different jurisdiction, at the comfort of one's house, while I am stealing money from other people. So this is where the challenges comes into place. And apart from that, and even I think it is also echoing what Alfred was highlighting, certain volumes, when I say volumes, when I consider fraud, Alfred mentioned that different types of fraud, typology, sense, these are all on, but also the volume and the value. Right, in this episode, we mentioned huge amounts of value, right? But those are targeting few volume.
In Malta?
In Malta, definitely, we're speaking every example we're giving on an individuals and companies in Malta. And also there are those fraud, which, and this is the greater challenge, where there are a huge amount of volume of cases, hence the opportunities are much larger, but the amounts are smaller. And this is when then the risk-based approach, which I think it's one of the most important elements that institutions use, even it is the recommendation of the FATF in this regard, one of the top 4 recommendations, comes into, I would say, greater expectations. Because one may say, okay, I made the transaction of 1,000, of 2,000. How come bank did not stop this kind of transactions? Right? We are living in a particular time where it's not the first time that banks are given negative feedback because we're asking too much questions. And at times I can understand that. And another instances, of course, it's an obligation that we need to do. But this is where it needs to be even, where perhaps fraudsters have even noticed this kind of opportunities, that if we do more volume with less value, the opportunity is even greater and the challenge is even greater to stop and notice such transactions. So what we can highlight is, again, both from an institution and a regulator perspective and from a private institution, from a bank, from Bank of Valletta, I think it's going really and truly very well. It's not the loopholes, because those are the easiest way, right? We can work on loopholes, we can update legislation, update laws, but this is there, this is working. This is the challenges and the opportunities that are making life a bit more complicated for businesses and individuals in Malta.
Okay, I am not an expert like you guys, but I want to break down this issue of having money going into other jurisdictions, even for the benefit of business community, because they ask it rightly when we also meet them. When you come to open a bank account, you are asked a number of questions. Then you open a bank account. Now, if I open a bank account and I am trading with another company, I am transferring money to this other company, let's say in France. So there is a trail of money going from my bank to this company's bank in France. In the previous episodes, we've heard situations where you pass the money to another bank account, which would be in France, but the second those money go in that bank account, then the fraudster will automatically send it in another jurisdiction. Okay. Mind-boggling, but help me, Alfred, to understand how. I know exactly the trail of transferring of money, but then all of a sudden, there is no checks and balances on what the fraudster is doing with that money. Can you help me that?
First of all, as Ryan is explaining, when someone goes to a bank to open a bank account, banks these days, not only in Malta but in many other countries, have really upped their game when it comes to checking that they're onboarding customers who do not intend to misuse the bank for the wrong reasons. So banks, first of all, want to make sure that they're onboarding customers who have legitimate interests and who also
reputation issues.
And exactly, and like Ryan is saying, banks ask a number of questions to get to know their customer. And this is very important for the bank, obviously, to make sure that it's not misused by criminals. But secondly, it is also important for customers themselves, because this information can also help the bank, as Ryan is explaining, identify transactions where maybe the customer is being a victim to a fraud. Now, when it comes to fraud, very often, and probably Ryan can also pitch in on this as well, what we have, especially in Malta, is we have many victims. All of us practically have been receiving messages or unsolicited calls or emails. So every single one of those means that we are being targeted by criminals. So we have all been targeted by criminals.
Yeah, but that's understandable, and I agree.
And very often, when this is successful, for the criminal, the money tends to leave Malta and go abroad. So this takes us to your question. Now, what criminals then seek to do is they try to make it as complicated as possible for the system to be able to block that money and bring it back. So today, first of all, with technology, internet banking, so everyone can carry out transactions with ease. Fraudsters, if they are well prepared, they know exactly what they're going to do if in the case of having a successful fraud for them. So if I'm targeting you and I'm going to manage to take money from you by deceiving you, I already have a plan in motion. I already have a plan in place, and I know exactly what I'm going to do with that money the moment you transfer it to, for example, this bank account. So they're using technology. I'm going to instantly start transferring money everywhere. Now, banks, as Ryan is saying, of course, they are there. They can spot unusual transactions. They can ask customers. But ultimately, it's not a foolproof system. If a customer in Malta of a Maltese bank is victim of a fraud and transfers, I don't know, say for example 5,000 euros, which is not a very big amount, and you have also the volumes and the values as well that Ryan was talking of, and this money goes to a bank account, I don't know, in Spain, that person may have also deceived that bank in Spain and having opened an account. It could be it's opened an account using a fake identification documents, for example. So there can be a mix of things as well, and it could be that there's also a money mule involved. So it is not a fake account opened under a fake identification. It's opened under true identification, but there is also the concept, for example, of people being misused also as money mules, and they are knowingly or unknowingly part of an actual money laundering operation.
Okay, let's dissect more the issue that you just mentioned. So you said this person from Malta sent money to Spain. So Spain, it is in the EU. So it has the EU jurisdiction. So you have then the bank in Spain is a legitimate bank, right? Now, from that point onwards, the person is going to withdraw the money. Now, my question is, the Spanish bank would know that the fraudster actually withdrew the money. Why isn't at that point that person identified? Because obviously you know, because the bank, the minute I try to extrapolate something, withdraw money from a bank account, he knows that Rachel did withdraw 5,000 euros. Actually, you can't, but anyway, but €5. What's your answer to that?
So first of all, Spain is just an example. It can be anywhere, and actually one of the problems is that it could be also in countries where their controls might be maybe not so good, even from the banking industry. So the truth is that banks are not all equal. You have some jurisdictions where banks apply tighter controls and other jurisdictions where they apply. So perhaps Spain isn't the best example. But from there, the likelihood is that the money isn't withdrawn in cash. So the likelihood is that that money then continues to flow to other jurisdictions, possibly broken down into smaller amounts and volumes to other jurisdictions outside of the European Union. Actually, very often from the cases that we see, money tends to go also to jurisdictions that are outside of the European Union, and that might make it even more complicated for law enforcement authorities to follow the trail, to follow that money. So essentially, very often the bank would not even know at that point in time that there might be something wrong. So yes, money left Malta, it goes to a bank account somewhere else in some other jurisdiction. That bank in that other jurisdiction might not be immediately aware that that money is actually the proceed of a fraud. Sometimes the victims themselves don't even know that they have been defrauded, and they only realize that they have been defrauded after a certain amount of time, days, weeks, or even months have passed. Sometimes they're even convinced that they're doing the right thing, and they just don't want to or they just find it very hard to understand that they are unfortunately the victims of a fraud. So in the meantime, a lot of time has passed, and the more time passes, the harder it is always to follow that trail and to be able to recover any monies.
So I think because I know Ryan would like to pitch in on this, so basically what you're saying is that it is harder to identify, because by the time you realize, whether a company or the individual realize the person has been a victim of a fraud, the money would have completely made the whole journey around the globe.
Sometimes even when we're working on money laundering suspicions, and we're almost sure basically that a transaction is the result of a fraud and it is being laundered. Sometimes, even though we reach out to another jurisdiction or even a bank in Malta, within a matter of hours, very often the money will have already moved on. So time is of the essence. This is why prevention in this case is, in all cases, but prevention is really much better than cure, because ideally you simply have the measures in place to try as much as possible to prevent your business or yourself from being the victim of a fraud in the first place.
We'll come to that later. Ryan?
Definitely, and the challenges will keep on increasing in the coming days. And let me explain why. Because from the coming days, there will be the introduction of instant payments, right? And by law, what banks are expected to do, of course, those that are in the scope of instant payments, is that payments will need to leave from A to B in 10 seconds. Maximum 10 seconds, right? This is the regulation that Bank of Malta and other banks need to adopt in the coming days and weeks. This year.
Can you explain that a bit?
Right, so I am sending a payment, an instant payment, by default it's called an instant payment, that by 10 seconds, in 10 seconds, the payment needs to leave Bank of Malta and goes somewhere else in Europe, in euro denomination, and using the instant mechanism in 10 seconds.
What we have been seeing for the past years, you might see this payment in 5 days' time. It's not going to be
If it's instant, right? Because they can still choose which type of service, but the majority will be instant payments.
Okay.
Those will be done in 10 seconds. So this will keep increasing the opportunities and increasing the challenge of what Alfred was highlighting in recovering the amounts. But let's just stick with figures what we have until today, right? This is some expectations, some more challenges coming in the next days. In fact, this Bank of Malta was going live on this. By October, we will go even introducing this new service. However, more or less, we are recalling all kind of fraud, right? So if I'm a victim of fraud, the customer asks the bank to try and recall the money back. As Alfred highlighted, unfortunately, many people many people, right, are not aware that are being defrauded after months and years, and we explain cases in past episodes, not being able to understand that you are a victim of fraud for 2-3 years or more. So I would say it is much difficult, I call it impossible, to get the money back, because those money are definitely laundered in different mechanisms, definitely laundered using other companies, kind of different kind of illicit activities. So this is definitely impossible. And there are those which is the mobile messages, which we know that you are defrauded in few hours. We try to make the recalls, and more or less, I consider this is a very good and successful rate. We have around 20-25% successful rate in getting the money back. I'm speaking about the volume and value, right? Because you can be defrauded 10,000, but we can bring back 2,000. I'm just highlighting not the case, but about the volume. So having a 25% good recall, that for me is excellent. I'm expecting that to decrease because of instant payments. I'm very clear about it, right? And also because the fraudsters nowadays are very much opportunities how to transfer money in very few minutes or seconds, right? So this is one of the most difficult challenge, because most of the money in Asia, this is good to highlight, are ending up in EU countries. The first step from Bank of Valletta, of course, I am focused on Bank of Valletta, are starting the first route to different countries. And these are trends. We can have a month, the money ending up to Spain, to continue what Alfred was highlighting, other month going to UK, other month going to Lithuania. It much depends on the trend, how the fraudster is adopting that. So this is another challenge for banks around the world and in Europe, that they are using trends and typology so that they can shift from one area to another. Let's also highlight what the inspector said in previous episode. These are organized crime groups, right? So they have all the time, they have all the tools, illicit tools, of course, to be able to shift money in different jurisdictions, in different mechanisms, under different pretexts that banks may ask, or banks may use a risk-based approach, and then it may be even detected. So this is the first important element.
Can I just stop you there, because you said something about money. So the journey of the amount. The amounts are eventually withdrawn or continues in a digital format?
Let's highlight an example that it happened. This is an example that we were successful in the recall, right? It was a bank in Cyprus, which I was speaking with my equivalent into the bank, and she called me in few hours telling me we were so lucky, the fraudster was exactly here trying to withdraw the money, right? We were so lucky in getting the money back. They spoke with their authorities, with the police. The fraudster literally went there with some supporting documentation, all fake, telling that this individual receives amount of money into his account as supporting documentation showing why he received it, and he is withdrawing that amount. It was around thousands, right? Withdrawing that amount because of this and that. We were so lucky that the money stopped, the person was arrested, etc., etc. Trying, and this was one case we can recall in 2025. Other amounts are all, as Alfred was highlighting, transfers in different jurisdictions, starting in new countries, ending up in different kind of monies, crypto, Bitcoin, into other jurisdictions which are not in EU. And this makes it, I would say, much more difficult in order to get the money back.
And this is all done digital?
All done digitally, as Alfred and the police highlighted from the comfort of your home on a laptop. To highlight that just now, even the inspector highlighted financial crime fraud is borderless, so this keeps on making it more challenging. This will also highlight the opportunity that the best control, and this is, I think, the main objective of this episode, is to be able to detect the fraud, right? Because if people think that I can have remedies that the bank can assist me, of course the bank will assist you, of course the bank will investigate, of course the FIAU will investigate, of course the police will do their job. But at the end of the day, the best control is you detecting a fraud and not being able to be the victim of a fraud.
Alfred, obviously on a much larger scale, because you're not just a bank, when you hear Ryan saying now there is this instant payment, why is it that there is such a regulation when we know, on the other hand, that people like Ryan are facing situations where it's harder now to, he said it himself, it's now going to be harder to trace that amount. Why then we have such rules and regulations?
That's a good question. To be honest, I don't know actually what triggered the need for the Instant Payments Directive. However, generally, obviously there are there are advantages to having, the ability to carry out transactions in a speedier manner, because the bulk of transactions are obviously very legitimate. So it's hard to allocate a percentage, but almost all of the transactions, comparatively speaking, are legitimate. And then there's a portion of transactions that are actually fraudulent or to launder proceeds of crime. So, one cannot argue, listen, let's stifle technology, let's stifle innovation, let us block, the development of tools, of AI, for example, so that technology is not misused by criminals. That's, unfortunately it's not the right approach. So we will continue to see developments. We will continue over time, over years. We'll continue to see new tools, new technological developments, new ideas, new products, new innovations that all have very legitimate uses, but can also all be misused. This is why then it is important to have controls in place. So absolutely, Ryan is right. This pressure on banks to carry out transactions in a matter of seconds, this is might make it harder for banks. Still, there needs to be a risk-based approach. So still, banks need to figure out how to strike the right balance, and and they might need to stop certain transactions before being executed if certain parameters are met, if there are certain very strong suspicions, for example. But yes, admittedly, it is probably harder on banks, but it will benefit then all of the legitimate customers of banks in carrying out international transactions.
You have been mentioning a lot the use of technology, AI, etc. What other tools do these fraudsters use to basically, steal you?
The tools are endless. Perhaps I'm mentioning AI because it is obviously a very recent development, and we can instantly see. It is very visible to everyone, even here in Malta, how even well-known people in Malta have actually been impersonated using AI tools. But aside from AI tools, there are many other tools. I mean, you can use fake invoices, you can use complex, unnecessarily complex corporate structures, setting up shell companies in Malta, outside Malta, using fake invoices, using just traditional means of communication, email, calls, text, WhatsApp messages, and so on. So companies that have been, even Maltese companies that have been the victim of fraud, of CEO fraud, or business email compromise fraud. In these cases, AI wasn't necessarily involved. So you can have a mix, as we were saying before. Criminals are quick to make use of anything that can help them carry out their criminal activities.
What about data here? Because we're only talking about money, but obviously data is also money.
Yes, data again is one of those sources of information that criminals often get get hold of, and then start using this data to carry out fraud, to identify victims, to be able to impersonate people, for example, to obtain contact information. So that's just one of the many other things that criminals are using in being able to carry out fraud and all types of fraud, be it individuals, personals, or even fraud that's targeting, for example, businesses, small businesses, big businesses.
Ryan, in this episode, and even in past episodes, he mentioned concrete examples. From your experience, obviously you see this as on a national level, because you're the FIAU is the Maltese. They look on the Maltese aspect. Is this something very common? Do you see it regularly, like the bank said, or?
So we see it at a national and an international level. So it's very interesting. So first of all, just a small point is, what is our role? So essentially our role is to combat money laundering and terrorism financing. Now, fraud is what we refer to as a predicate offense. It is a crime that gives rise to proceeds and therefore leads to the money laundering offense. So banks and other entities in Malta, like gaming companies, like crypto companies, financial institutions, they are actually obliged to submit a report to us when they suspect money laundering, irrespective of what might be behind the money laundering taking place. Now, fraud is the top predicate offense identified in the suspicions of money laundering that we receive. So last year in 2024, we received close to 10,000 suspicious reports from industry. 10,000. Now, approximately around 4,000 of those reports were based on the suspicion that money laundering was coming from fraud. So that's a huge chunk of the reports that we received that are therefore believed to be linked to fraudulent activity. Now, we receive these from banks, from financial institutions, from crypto companies, and also from gaming companies. And many of these entities have customers abroad. So the customers are actually not in Malta. So what we're seeing is that the operators in Malta who are servicing customers who are also in Malta but also outside Malta are identifying quite a significant number of suspicion of money laundering that they believe is connected to fraud. So we're not the only ones. Malta is definitely not the only one. There has been quite a focus on fraud. There has been quite a focus also on business email compromise fraud. This has been going on for years. For example, the Egmont group of FIUs, which brings together all of the FIUs from all over the world, in 2019, if I recall well, published a short but a very good document on business email compromise fraud. So this has been going on. It's just that it keeps going and going and doesn't seem to stop, and for many different reasons, including, as we were saying, I think that the use of technology is providing more tools to criminals to perpetrate their illicit activities.
From the very important, very good information Alfred just gave in Malta, in the local context, do you see this as a bank? And also, what are the industries that are really affected from this type of fraud?
So first of all, definitely we are seeing even the same expectations as Alfred is highlighting, right? Fraud is one of the most predicate offenses that also we reported during last year. So I echo this very much, and this highlights.
So you reported to FIAU?
Of course, Bank of Malta being one of a subject person, an entity obliged with this AML CFT requirements, also needs to submit reports as an institution, which is one of the main obligations I need to highlight, even one of the main obligations of myself in detecting suspicious transactions, right? And we have all I would say in the past years, Bank of Malta made a number of improvements in this regards. Technology, AI also, we use our transaction monitoring with the ability of AI and machine learning, both for customer experience, because at the end of the day, customer experience is important, right? Rather than to keep on calling you for this or for that. Unnecessary. This is part of technology being used in a good manner, being used in the good expectations. And we have the time then to focus on where it is required. So this is one of the elements, but unfortunately, and this yet again, I think COVID brought many negative highlights, right? One of the major negative highlights, which is not focused on health or on social, etc., it is fraud, right? People wanted money at the time, and criminals wanted to keep on doing their trades, and they shifted, right, in doing the online fraud, and this fraud that is much more easier to do border. So this was a shift, and this is highlighted also in previous episodes, that perhaps we are seeing so much victims because we're not yet prepared, we're not yet aware, we're not yet educated with this kind of risk that we have nowadays. Yet again, I keep on giving this example, Rachel, just to highlight how important it is for everyone listening to this kind of podcast, to this kind of discussions, to create awareness in the organization. Right, because we have a habit that, okay, how come, that individual, that customer, that company did not notice the fraud? Believe me, and I think we all agree on this, myself and Alfred, to discuss some cases every now and then. Believe me that some cases, we can see them too good to be true. But those are the cases, right, that we are seeing. So awareness is one of the best highlight that we can have. If we can compare Malta of 1980s, 1970s to Malta of 2022, 2020, right? Let's at our houses, we see a number of alarms, a number of CCTV cameras. At the past, when you used to see a CCTV camera, I can recall, I'm not young anymore, but I can recall, look at this, that home has a camera. We can see perhaps he is wealthy, perhaps he is rich. And this is, I'm doing this kind of comparisons because people learn that a CCTV, an alarm, can make your assets more secure. But people at the time of this day we are living, not really understanding that in our phones, as explained earlier, we have all our assets with us, and we're not really and truly asking, understanding what's happening. More difficult to that when we hear these cases, we try to distance a bit ourselves with these cases. How come?
It will not happen to me.
It will not happen to me, right? I can understand this. There's a number of cases, unfortunately, which, for example, a customer called Bank of Malta customer care asking to increase their limits, their daily limits. And much of these individuals, because we're understanding what's happening nowadays, Bank of Malta is calling them, is highlighting to them, that there's a lot of fraud. Make sure that the money you are sending abroad, because you are increasing your daily limit, with whom you're speaking. Much of these individuals, right, they say, yes, of course, I know what I'm doing, this is all good, this is fine. Then they ending up victims of fraud. Because people, include ourselves, may think this will never happen to me. I can spot this scam, I can understand, but it's not happening.
Does the bank have the authority to stop someone from completely stop?
Definitely, and rather than the authority, it is the obligation. Right, because there's a number of laws. One of the obligations that we have, amounting from law, just the local laws, right? Chapter 373, subsidiary legislations. I'm just highlighting FIAU implementing procedures. So I'm just highlighting what the framework is. If I am noticing a suspicious transaction, right, which is ending up a fraud, and yet again, my main worry, because we're just touching, right, the top of the iceberg here, right? We don't know where the money is ending at the end of the day. So I'm obliged to stop a transaction, not in letting a transaction happening. And let's mention another case. It's not a company, it's a personal customer, but at the end of the day, a personal customer is representing a company.
Yeah.
There was someone in one of the branches that wanted to send the money to Nigeria because she said that she have won the lottery and someone sent her an email, this kind of, nowadays I call it kind of fraud. This individual, the bank was telling her that this is a fraud. You didn't actually participate in a lottery. How come you can win a lottery? But she kept on saying, no, I will take the risk. I can send this 2,000 money to Nigeria because I might get the money of $300 at the time, and it might be a good win. She was, I think, believing her that her luck was on. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe, I don't know, I was abroad and I just took a ticket somewhere. So she was, I think, believing it. But my main worry was, and this is why I'm giving this example, because she said, you have an authority, of course, you have an obliged to stop such a... My main worry was, what about this individual is not a victim but a perpetrator? What about this woman was doing a story to send some money to a terrorist financing in Nigeria without even us or the bank knowing that she's not a victim, but she's actually a perpetrator. So she is creating a story which can be believed because it's part of the trends that's happening in fraud, so that she can send money. And we have seen this kind of thoughts even in other highlights, So
yeah, in fact, some people would make the argument, this is my money, and I can do what I want with them. Now I know that you disagree with that statement, but partially there is an element of truth. And if he really wants to, I see the point of someone being part of a criminal organization himself, but then we're seeing the victims now ending up like there. So in that respect, the bank, you're saying, has an obligation to stop both.
Correct. And let's just perhaps give a bit of context, right? My main worry, and I hope that Alfred agrees with me on this, my main worry is on the...
No pressure, Alfred.
No, right? It's this part of the risk-based approach that we are expected to do Right? It's not something that I want to do or maybe I might be interested in doing. We're expected to do a risk-based approach. Right? It's one of the recommendations of FATF, so we are obliged to be aligned with those recommendations. FIAU speaks on many instances on adopting the right risk-based approach, and perhaps my main worry and my main thoughts are on depositing money in rather than money out. Let's start with that, right, Rachel? So, and you told me, perhaps you not agree with me, that this is the right of the customer to have his money. And to a certain extent, yes, I agree with you. Right, we're not here so that people cannot withdraw their money. We're not here to tell customers what to do with their monies, right? And as I first was highlighting, why? Because I would call 99.99% of transactions are legitimate, good transactions, right? So, God forbid we keep on asking on every transaction, on everything we're doing. And yet again, we do also understand that some transactions are in cash. And some transactions are in cash, people withdrawing money. So if you go to one of our branches and want to withdraw an X amount of money, if that amount is aligned with your profile, right, that's fine. That's fine. Right? It's your money. It's your way of doing transactions, so there's nothing wrong in that regard. And yet again, without of the transactions we do on a daily basis, only the very few we are stopping, only the very few we are going and asking for supporting documentation. However, when we see certain patterns of fraud, of other financial crime, because we just focus on fraud, but let's stick to fraud, we are obliged on both instances, both for customer experience, because maybe we are saving a customer his money in being lost. Yeah, because people might say, oh, Bank of Valletta is asking for this or for that. We have some customers who also can highlight some good stories. Business email compromise. You just call customer, is this normal? You are sending money to this? No, I don't know. Thank you for that. There were some people who even sent us in writing how appreciated, because we stopped certain transaction from yet again in our previous podcast we mentioned that we saved around 1.7 million in fraud just from Bank of Valletta controls not being able to leave our premises. Thanks to controls, thanks to what we are doing. So this is the balance of both. Then we can I call them very unfortunate cases, but yet again this is the decisions that we need to make, that in some cases we even exit our customers. So we say that you are being defrauded, you keep on doing that kind of activity, you keep on sending money, you keep on receiving perhaps money that you are receiving in victim of fraud. And yet again, the banks, not just Bank of Valletta, but with Bank of Valletta, the really does not want to be associated with such risks. You know, so
then you're speaking about reputation
risk. Not only there could AML risk, safety risk. That it again. Let's keep on highlighting that at the end of the day, we are very much focused. We are very much giving some thoughts where the money are ending and for what they are being used.
Alfred, I understand the argument that Ryan mentioned about the risk-based approach, but from your experience, what type of risk-based approach should now companies do to try and mitigate this?
Yeah, that's I think a very important question. I strongly believe that the most important thing is awareness. And awareness comes in different ways. So I think companies can do a lot. First of all, raise awareness, especially big companies who have several customers, who have several suppliers, who have many employees. Each and every individual is a person who might be impersonated or might be tricked by a fraudster. So perhaps if you're a very small company, you can still be a victim, you can still be a target. But bigger companies who have more customers, more suppliers, and more employees might be easier to trick into. So I think having awareness, having training, ensuring that people are trained, employees are trained, how to spot a phishing attack, how to spot a fraudulent email, how not to provide any information that you shouldn't. I think also another very important point is to have good processes internally to make sure that you're not that your finance team is not tricked. We ourselves actually at the FIAU once received an email that from someone who was pretending to be me, sent to our finance team. but they noticed that something was not right, and fortunately we identified it. So I think it's about raising awareness, having good training internally, and having good governance policies and procedures. And I think a good dose of skepticism is healthy, because by stopping something, by just double checking, you're not going to do anything wrong. I mean, we ourselves, every day we receive some email that is, from a phishing attack or something. I just don't do anything, don't click anything. I send it to our IT team and I ask them, is this okay? Is this safe? So it's all about awareness and being also a bit skeptical and careful and cautious.
I say this with by being very responsible, but almost the fact that we kind of receive them a bit on a daily basis, these type of emails or SMSs, is practically, I would say, making it more aware, if you know what I mean. Because in the past, you might have received once a month, but now, because it's happening too regularly, almost now, the individual is becoming a bit more aware. Then I'm not saying that you don't make mistakes. Of course, we're seeing it, as Ryan said during the past episodes. But I think the fact that it's true that they're becoming more sophisticated and more almost authentic, I would say. But apart from these type of programs, I think the fact that we're receiving it on a regular basis are making us more on our tiptoes to understand that this can happen.
I agree. I totally agree. But on the other hand, if you have, an entity and it's receiving these attacks practically on a daily basis, there's also then an increased risk that one day or another the criminals will manage to get it right, and penetrate through the safety measures that any company might have in place. So, but I also agree with you, however, that these constant messages, these constant phishing emails and attempts are helping at the same time raise awareness.
You mentioned two things which, even as the Chamber, we have been pushing a lot, which is good governance and training people. From your experience with local companies, how are you satisfied with what they're doing, or you think more needs to be done?
Our experience mostly is actually in having interactions with reporting entities like banks, company service providers, financial institutions. It's not that much with the customers of these entities. So probably there's a lot more awareness today, at least from what we see, and maybe Ryan can add more to that. I think there's a lot more awareness in general. However, more needs to be done. We need to keep in mind also that things change from one day to the next. The moment criminals see a new opportunity, a new modus operandi that they can use to carry out a fraud, they're going to go for it. So we might be used to having to receiving certain types of emails or to receiving certain types of messages or something. But tomorrow you can have something that's totally new. We have not seen it before. And we might unfortunately be a victim to that. So there needs to be constant awareness, constant training, needs to be ongoing, and definitely having the right processes in place, especially when it comes to carrying out payments, because someone can impersonate a supplier, someone can impersonate an employee, including like a CEO or a head of finance or something, and someone can also impersonate a customer. We've had these cases too in Malta, where fraudsters reached out to, for example, a bank or an investment company, pretending to be the customer. And unfortunately, the investment company or a bank, I can't remember the exact case, thought it was a genuine email, whereas it wasn't, and the money had unfortunately gone.
Ryan, are you happy with from what you see?
Rather than I'm happy or not, this is not just being happy with what, right? This is being able to keep a constant approach and understanding what's happening around us. Right, at the end of the day, these are well-earned money that are being lost on a daily basis. And we have mentioned some cases in the past, which unfortunately companies lost everything, not being able to pay their employees. This is how material situation can be, right? So it is super important, Rachel, that we keep track of what's happening around us, right?
And I think question as well.
Agreed. I hear you speaking with Alfred saying we're receiving so much emails that perhaps you might note, right? This is a very good school of thought. On the other hand, which I agree also with both of you, the risk is even increased. Was one day you might have a day, you might think that it was the real Alfred sending an email to the finance department. So by increasing the opportunity, by increasing the chance, potentially it may increase the probability of being defrauded also. And if I may mention this, on companies, this case didn't happen in Malta, but this is how creative one can be. There was an individual abroad in US which started by a joke. This is, people can look at this, by a joke, sending invoices to two big companies in US, two US Silicon Valley companies, asking them that he is doing the cleaning of their premises.
Yes, it's a famous one.
You know, it's a famous one.
Yes.
You know, and this actually started with a joke. He said, let's just send them an invoice, right? Not a fake invoice, it's a true invoice of this individual. So there's nothing fake, just sending them to them, just joking with them. And after 2 weeks, these two companies, not one, two companies, which are very well known and perhaps training they give to their customers, very profitable companies. So after 2 weeks, these two companies started sending him money because of the cleaning of premises that this individual was doing. There was no cleaning happening, never went to this kind of companies, but they say, this company say it's fine, right? Their finance department said, okay, this is cleaning, it's okay. This very much ties up with what Alfred was saying. Few amounts of money for them. You know for how many years it kept on doing? How many?
4.
More than 4 years, right? Sending invoices and these companies giving him money for nothing. Then he started living a lavish life, putting his images on Facebook and Instagram, etc. And authorities start investigating how come this individual, you know. But no, this is fraud, you know, by some simple things. Asking when you say an email,
and he had no dark webs, no nothing.
So and this ties up with, again, with the earlier messages we were giving.
Yeah.
Don't think that, you know, you will be the victim of a very complex fraud that is just a message on your phone. It's just an email that perhaps you need to question. It's just someone changing your IBAN. It's just someone pretending that he's doing an investment which is too good to be true abroad without even asking your bank, your financial institution, or someone you may wish to ask if this is a fraud or not. People asking you to send them money because they are ending up in a war, torn countries, etc. So the very basics, things that are happening around us.
Alfred Zammit, FIAU Director, Ryan Caruana, BOV Group Chief Anti-Financial Crime Officer, thank you for being with us. Listeners who would like to follow previous podcasts can do so by clicking on the Malta Chamber website or on BOV social media or as well on Spotify, and they can follow all the podcasts that we did so far. Also, for those listeners who would wish to contact someone from BOV on these subjects that we are discussing, we are providing you with this number, 21312020. I repeat, 21312020. I assure you all communication will be handled with respect for privacy. I urge you to follow more and to disseminate these podcasts to your colleagues, to your friends, to your family members, because one day it could be you. Thanks for listening.